Good evening. We're we're saving money on music because we don't want to pay royalties, so we just cut in and we go live. So welcome to the Privy Council, Ash Wednesday for those of you who are observing. Happy Ash Wednesday to you. I guess that's Happy Ash Wednesday. And happy George Washington's real birthday. If you're keeping score at home, that's also something to celebrate. And we're going to talk about a couple different topics. We were going to focus on alternative or artificial intelligence for the whole show, but we're going to, with everything that's going on, we're going to broaden that a little bit, and we're going to take a dive into alternative intelligence, just to talk about sort of lay down a baseline as to what it is, and lay down a baseline as it relates to, is it good, is it bad, could it be both in terms of its applications, and then we're going to move into the other topics of Ukraine and then the response to Ukraine, and then to just a little musing about Biden in 2024 and what's the real goal here as it relates to his activities in support of his campaign. I have with me tonight my friend Jim, Old Hong Kong, my friend Joe of Tactical Wisdom, and Mike Bennett, ski entrepreneur extraordinaire, and of course the Watcher. So, gentlemen, Jim, what's new with you? We'll do a quick around, and then we'll get going.
No, just amazed at the rate of change and the global positioning of the United States with our policy vacuum, the PRC in Russia, and all the ancillary players, and just at the kind of moribund EU / France and Germany world. So it's keeping it all spicy.
You know, it really is telling to see how much of a leadership vacuum there is across the European Union between what we've always thought of as the core of the EU, Great Britain until they left, but France and Germany, and they're not leading this discussion any longer. It's Poland and Estonia and Latvia, and occasionally the Dutch or the Danes, but it's really the Eastern European new additions that are driving this discussion, and the Germans and the French, I think, are ceding influence that they may never get back, depending upon how this goes. So we'll see. Joe, you're off to South Carolina soon.
North Carolina.
Yeah,
in the morning, and it's amazing. I've known about this trip for months, and I am still not packed, and I leave in a few hours. In fact, I'm knee deep in a craft project related to that trip. So,
what kind of preparation is that, Joe?
What's that?
What kind of preparation is that?
Oh, it's just arts and crafts. I mean, I'm prepared. I'm ready.
So was that sourced at Michael's, just out of curiosity? And did you burn any?
No.
Okay. Did you burn any of the Michael's coupon stash?
I probably could have sourced the jute twine here from there, and probably saved a penny or two from where I got it, because I bought a lot. So
I believe that. So is there sniping involved in this exercise?
No. There's going to be a little bit of force on force ambushing, and whoever can get into position undetected first gets to ambush the other side. So, ghillie suits are for more than just sniping.
I understand that. Have you done research as to what the local flora looks like at this time?
Yes, I had some photos sent to me, not by NC Scout, because he didn't want to help me out, but somebody else did send me some photos, and I've looked at some aerial imagery. So that's why I'm making a new one.
And are there any power substations in the area that you're going to be in? I don't want to see a photo of
that question on the grounds that it may incriminate someone. I don't know who.
Indeed. All right, I'm going to turn to our resident ski and snowboard bum and check in on his well-being and welfare. What's going on with you?
You make it sound like that's the only thing I do.
Oh no. But we're not clear. we're
My
not cleared for-
repertoire of winter activities is so extensive. Today, I did a 2-mile snowshoe up. I think I climbed 650 feet,
Mhm.
according to my map and such. It was quite exciting, and
What he
it
didn't
was
tell
very
you is that
very
he
cold.
did it because that's where the beer special was.
No, I do shit like that just because I like pain.
Did you catch the rabbit?
No, it was cold and quite a wind chill. Very exciting. Very exciting
Good stuff,
day.
man.
And are we would we be correct to think that intermittent into all this is a little bit of writing going on with respect to
There is a little bit, yes.
book 7 in the Warlock series?
I posted chapter 1 on my
I read
website.
it. I read it.
All right.
But I'm
That's
just,
a rough draft.
we've all suffered at the hands of Sibley, and chapter 1 doesn't mean that you're going to get to the end. So.
Yeah, that means it could be like anytime in the next 6 years.
That's
No,
about right.
I think we have to give Mike the benefit of the doubt on that.
We've
but
been hurt before, Mike.
So
where did the writer hurt you? Yeah,
I've told you that the process for me is I've got to map it out in my head. And in this particular case, I'm looking at about a 20-year span in which I want to kind of do a contrast between the Reagan years and the Clinton years as far as policy goes.
Uh-huh.
But
That's not even fair.
but it's going to be a righteous slam dunk, purposefully.
Good.
So, you know,
and are we're correct in assuming that this is the sort of Warlock origin story? Is that fair?
that is correct.
Okay.
Right on the cover says
Yeah.
the origin of the Warlock. So yeah, I'm doing a bit, but I think I got the 80s all lined up. It's the 90s that are really kind of kicking my ass because that was during that foreign policy nightmare of the Clinton years.
Hey, we got Osama bin Laden. You want him? No, we don't want him.
That was the slumming of love.
Yeah.
Would it be fair to say it's somewhat autobiographical or autobiographical? Thank you.
I don't know nothing.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Great. Watcher, how are you?
CWSP thinks that Florida's the bomb and the cold weather is not a cool thing. He's probably right.
I'm doing good, Stan.
Good.
Thanks for asking.
Good. All right. Old business being taken care of. We'll move on to new business. Let's pull up our materials for the day. So as I said, we're going to start off with a look at artificial intelligence, and artificial intelligence is a little bit like describing that is a little bit like the parable of the 9 blind Indian guys and an elephant, where each guy's holding a different part of the elephant and asked to describe the elephant, the animal that's involved. So if you're holding the trunk or the ears or the tail or a leg or what have you, I'm not going to go anatomically beyond that. What you think the animal is may be vastly different from what it is, and so, but artificial intelligence is sort of broadly described as intelligent behavior. Machine learning is extracting more value, more knowledge from that data set, and deep learning is artificial neural networks, and it can be applied in any number of settings. And I want to correct something because a lot of people think that AI is a new phenomenon. It's not, and you'll see in one of the other slides. It's been around for a while. I mean, you have to remember, I think it was in the late 80s, early 90s that Gary Kasparov lost a chess match to Deep Blue, which was the pinnacle of sort of IBM computing aspects at that point. So it's been something that's been upon us or coming upon us for quite some time. But I think what's sort of mushroomed it into the public's consciousness is the fact that Google and Microsoft through Bing and with Chat GPT and Bard and Sydney and whatever else is sort of spewed out of this, is that it's at the forefront of both search and social media, which is where a lot of us spent a lot of our time. Yeah, HAL 9000. That's Rick. You're right. I wouldn't do that, Dave. So I think it's I think it's good. I think it promises to be much more in our faces in the near future. And I in particular, and you'll hear the council opine on this. I have some real concerns on the impact of artificial intelligence more broadly in the hands of humans. That to me sounds like a bad combination. So let's move on then to our next little thing. And I apologize for these because they're small. Maybe what we do is watch if I can ask you to blow that up. And yeah, there we go. That's better. So almost every industrial sector or human endeavor has the potential to be touched by AI. And you see in the chart on the left hand side sort of a wheel of almost every industry you can think of. And I think that's on the whole a good thing, but I think that in certain areas we're going to have to be concerned. And I'm going to ask for people to jump in this conversation. I don't want to make this a monologue, but the areas where I've been involved in this are healthcare, agriculture, communication, and banking and personal finance, or at least the financial sector in the context of trading of securities and algorithmic aspects of that. Social networks, defense. I think probably Joe and Mike have had more, and maybe Watcher have had more exposure to that. But we are going to talk about what role does AI play in national defense and what could possibly go wrong in that context. But you'll see that you know a lot of industries are spending time on this. But the graph on the right shows you some milestones as it relates to AI and what happened. You recall, I think, Siri coming out, and everybody sort of being gobsmacked by what Siri does. You recall probably Alexa with Amazon and what have you. I will not allow Alexa in our household.
Yeah, not going to happen.
I don't feel comfortable with that amount of data being transmitted back to Jeff Bezos. I don't use Siri on any of our Apple devices. So I'm a bit of a Luddite, and I'll admit it. But I also have great reservation about if you're the product, which you are in social media and these other aspects, then giving that information away for free, to me, just strikes me as being too much information outside of your control. Anybody got anything to add to that?
No, couldn't
No,
agree more.
I agree wholeheartedly, and this is why he's not here, but I'll take up his side. Matt, NC Scout, teaches the concept of the war tablet. Having a tablet or device that has never been connected to Google or Apple services is a great thing to have, right? As a means of communication with people or a mean to free yourself from that. It's an incredibly hard discipline to maintain, but we don't realize how much this AI touches us. For example, we did an experiment at home once where we didn't ever do a Google search for it, but just in the house with the phones present, we talked about chicken feed, which is something we would never talk about. After about 3 days of discussing chicken feed 3 or 4 times a day, the ads began to show up. And I know a lot of people say, well, it's just targeted advertising. Well, it's AI that does that, right? In listening to your conversations and deciding what you're looking for. There is such a thing as too much convenience, right? And that's what artificial intelligence is designed to do, make you a slave to the machine.
And again, I'm going to distinguish this. This is the interaction of artificial intelligence in the context of direct human interface in social media, advertising, those sorts of things. We'll talk
Yeah.
about it a little bit deeper in certain areas. Where as a research tool, where its primary function is data analysis, it really is going to be a force for good. But I think anytime you get anytime you get the broader public involved in this, and you have the ability to have the owners of artificial intelligence target the general public as the database,
Yeah.
the ability to abuse that is stunning. Joe, to your
Well-
point, your point. I look for something on Amazon or on Google or what have you. I've never been a member of Facebook, but my wife is a member of Facebook, and ads for that show up in her Facebook account. So I
Right.
mean, it's spooky.
It's the same with the email thing where it suggests a response for you, right? You open
Yeah.
up your email and you've got an email from someone and it's got like 3 suggested responses at the bottom. You need to understand what that's telling you. It's telling you that the AI is reading your emails. And you have to ask yourself, to what end? To make it easier for me to reply or to mine it for data that someone else can use to target me, whether it's for advertising or whatever else. And I think Michael backed me up on this one too. From a defense standpoint, AI is why these balloons have been able to be undetected. And what I mean by that is our radar systems had a kind of an AI rule that the machine would ignore any target moving less than 100 miles an hour over ground because it was trying then to not get radar returns off of birds or other small objects, and that's how these balloons were able to evade our radar system.
What's probable about that is that China did its own study, kind of with that in mind, looking for a gap in intelligence, with our sophisticated, all kinds of high. It's not that radar can't pick it up, as Joe was saying, but you get so much data that's extraneous. You have to then say, okay, here's a filter, cut these things out, which clearly was done to minimize the amount of data into what they thought was, an altitude of X plus, is something of interest. Anything below that altitude is not, whatever rule set they put in there. And that's how they figured out this means to slip this stuff in, while we weren't looking in the right place.
Yeah, I just and I'm sorry for the echo. I just think it's I don't do a good job of it, but I'm at least mindful of trying to reduce my footprint with respect to the data that I cough up for other people to digest. But it's hard to avoid. If you have an Instagram account, you're screwed, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
If you have
Facebook
anything
is
connected to Facebook,
Facebook is the best harvester of all this stuff that
Yeah.
I've seen.
the most aggressive by far.
And the most aggressive. And so I just, you have to be. My Instagram account is I don't ever post anything on it. I don't ever respond to anything on it. It's simply a way for me to follow certain things that are accessible on Instagram that are of interest to me. But I try to minimize that, my exposure on anything that is Facebook derived. So it's I maybe I'm an old guy that's a little wacky about this stuff. I'll admit that, but I think seeing what we see coming, whether that's you know central bank digital currencies or the other aspects of the surveillance state, I I worry about that. And I don't use the GPS location or the navigation in my truck because I don't want people to know where I'm going or how I'm going or the route that I take in the context of all the rest of that sort of stuff. So I'm a little bit of maybe the Unabomber mindset in that regard, but I don't think without reason. So
Hey,
but
his methodology might have been wrong, but he was spot on the impacts of technology on our lives.
yeah. All right, let's keep going here. I think healthcare is an area where AI and basically scientific research in particular has got tremendous application from a productivity perspective and the ability to reason solutions that probably will benefit mankind. And I won't belabor this point, but this is the table of contents of an artificial intelligence and drug discovery and biotech year-end 2022 recap. And the table of contents is instructive just in the wide range of things that it covers. And AI in the context of healthcare is doing all these things and more. It's going to revolutionize drug discovery. It's going to revolutionize the analysis of data from clinical tests. It's going to basically allow the engineering of biologic medicines to a great degree that we've never had the capacity to do before. And then where it gets a little scary is when you get into marrying artificial intelligence with CRISPR and gene editing. There is a situation where you've got great ability for that to be used for good, but also you have the ability for it to be used for like this Chinese guy that's still in prison for having created half a dozen genetically engineered kids illegally as well. So it's got tremendous, and my own personal interaction with this is represented in the right hand box there, and that is I was involved in a company that has a patent on a population of human adult stem cells, and we were able to determine that that population was heterogeneous. In other words, it wasn't the cells weren't all the same. They had certain cell type predilections for development, and we went to great lengths to utilize a database in Switzerland called Nebion that had done genetic mapping of different tissue types, and a machine learning software called Sim Machines to try to identify certain characteristics of those cells so that we could identify which cells were had a greater genetic predilection to develop into either cardiac tissue or pancreatic tissue or liver tissue or nerve tissue, which were the four types of tissue that we were able to discern by its certain different genetic footprints. And so this was all done on a supercomputer with machine learning that was saying, okay, here's the DNA or RNA or other proteins to look for in the composition of this to identify these cells that were then carved out, cultured, and used for development of cardiac tissue and pancreatic tissue. And pancreatic tissue alone is something that if you can, the islet cells of the pancreas, if you can grow those from stem cells in somebody's own body that is diabetic, that's a pretty big cure. I mean, cardiac, pancreas, liver, nerve, that's pretty much the core systems from a disease set perspective. And so if you can actuate the ability to grow new tissue in those areas, you can do a lot of good in the world of healthcare. So I have great hope for what AI is going to do in terms of small molecule design or discovery and drug development and regenerative medicine applications. And I think for the most part, people in those industries are using this in the correct way because they're not using it to sort of lob insults and comments back and forth or to change the narrative around either public policy or private policy. They're using it for discovery. And I think that's something that bodes well for AI. Nope. Yes.
No, I agree.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
I have a little input, and I'll start on your biological observation. So, I tend to look at things from the standpoint of risk, and you're talking about this Dr. Hu Jiankui. I think he was at Rice University. That guy, yeah, he's being rehabilitated.
Yes, he is.
He's circulating again, and he's circulating by choice, and the choice is the choice of the party. They're putting him back on the road, He'll be talking in England. He'll probably come back to the U.S. But it's interesting because China's stopped the export of that technology. They don't want too many people to have this technology. So when you look at when the central party comes out and says we're going to not allow something, that there's either great opportunity or great risk or both. And so it's clear there's great risk and great opportunity in this concept. And their tie-in to artificial intelligence and the use of automation for the processes around all these organic and cellular designs. It's unbelievable how effective it is. But behind it is a great deal of other implementations of AI, ML, and the other variables. And it's massively oversold, and it is really poorly understood the impact it's going to have sociologically. And the leading indicators of the behaviors you see on Facebook and Google et al. And you go back to the original, sources of these algorithms and this machine learning, and it's tied into a few mathematics schools. The French were very effective. The Canadians out of Montreal were very effective. MIT had an interesting cluster. Department of Energy had an interesting cluster. But post 9/11, everybody started funding this stuff, and you had the advent of U.S. government-funded organizations that were kind of parallel and outside of DARPA, In-Q-Tel et al., who put billions of dollars to work in this field to get this kind of AI, ML, precursor technology, big data technology in-house, and then begin collecting the data. And what's happened is they've collected the data. They don't need us anymore. What they need from us is just to watch our behavior, because they have the corpus of data, or they have the massive bubble of data that they need. And the issue now is prioritizing, sourcing, and allocating that data to missions that they prioritize. And clearly watching us and watching our behavior is there, but the cat's out of the bag, so to speak. They don't need our individual input now to hone their data, but they need to keep learning, because these AI systems have a half-life. They aren't a fire and forget technology. You don't launch AI and say, "Oh, I've got AI and it's going to be this panacea for me in my mission." When you choose to use AI, it's an iterative process, and they have a half-life, and the half-life requires maintenance and constant attention and constant upgrade. And so, there's a lot of people who've made big bets on this concept of AI and machine learning. It will ultimately pay out well, but the place it's paid out best is in the world where it doesn't have a cost limit. So in national level missions that have no cost boundaries. So in our government, it would be the National Security Agency. All of the IC have made great use of these kind of technologies, but it isn't perfect and it is expensive. The average cost of utilization is falling, but across all those applications, it's in use. And the government of China has used it for social surveillance. They've been very effective at it. And what it comes down to is we're kind of the provisioner. It's kind of the Logan's Run thing, which is they're going to recycle us into this. We feed that machine with our behavior to keep it honed nicely.
But Jim, I to interrupt you for just a second. I think you're right about that, but we're straying a little bit, because we're going to come to that. I think from a biotech perspective, the research facing portion of AI really does have some benefit to it. Within that context of biotech, what I get concerned about is what I call the Gattaca effect, where that ability to discern genetic composition and extrapolate future outcomes from it becomes something that allows the state or whomever, your employer, to categorize you on the basis of things that haven't happened yet, on the basis of your genetic composition or a predilection derived by your genetic composition. And that's where I think it becomes highly discriminatory and very, very dangerous for the population as a whole. And that's, I think, the thing that we may see more of, that as the uses for either prenatal genetic engineering or postnatal repair of aspects, people may be out of the pool because the in a scenario like the National Health Service where you want to have a lung transplant, but you've got some other sort of condition that is going to limit your life, on a cost risk adjusted basis, the council may say, no, sorry, we're not going to spend that money on you because you're going to die in 2 years based on something else anyhow. And I think that's an anathema to the way that most Americans think about their right to health care and their right to have, what they can afford in the way of solutions to their healthcare problems.
Yeah, but that privacy's already been ceded. I think that's
I don't doubt it. And HIPAA
Yeah.
notwithstanding, I don't think that privacy exists.
so the AI components here. So actually, it's not AI; it's big data at this point because they don't even need to apply AI to this. But you've got a big data experience here where, I mean, good example, my wife just filled out a bunch of documents to go in and have an annual physical, and it's 7 pages of yes, no, maybe, grandma this, grandpa that. And there are questions in there are you happy? Have you been depressed? And so as you build out these data structures for these people, they're studying you. And within all the agreements you sign under the Obamacare programs, you're waiving a lot of the privacy rights because they can study you as a herd, right?
Mhm.
So they're looking at you as this herd management exercise. And the concern that you were voicing about AI beginning to segregate the herd is they're going to look at the herd and say, okay, of the herd, we've got 1/3 of the community that may be at higher risk. And within the 1/3, we're going to have a smaller percentage of people who are going to exhibit high risk or are aberrational or outside the edge or whatever you want to say of the data structure. And we have to manage towards those people. There's no way that a smart system like this cannot bias its product, its delivery, its services without that. And they will find that there will be abuse of that privilege as the systems become more automated. So as you let a system try to be efficient without human interaction at this point, and you allow the data structures to age without outside controls, you end up in a crisis model. And the crisis model is from the humanistic standpoint, what we expect our privacy, our individuality. The system is constantly going to drive towards efficiency unless you have human interaction. And it comes back to the observation you've constantly got to have human interaction from people who have, and this is the hard part, correct goals, right? And this is where a place like China, they have correct goals. They know they have correct goals. Nobody questions that they have correct goals, and they move on those party goals. Here in the United States, we have these individual liberties which drive that conflict in these groups. So somebody may say we need to go for efficiencies. Somebody may say we need to take care of the individual. And we saw this in the argument over vaccination for COVID. A lot of people just said no. The system biased itself towards saying you can't say that. We're going to declare an emergency and you must comply. And this is the kind of thing that we're going to run into trouble with AI because you teach the system, you allow the system to learn, you feed it data. It's only as good as what you fed it, and getting it into a mode where it's looking forward and it's doing more of its own learning, it's choosing what to learn. You have to be able to guide it because an unbounded learning system uh, gets unpredictable.
Yeah, one of to tie that back to the recent experience with the pandemic, I'm concerned that we're setting ourselves up for the sort of global intervention. I saw today that we're the countries are making progress in terms of a new treaty under the auspices of the World Health Organization to effectively cede sovereignty as it relates to future pandemic response. And I'm really concerned about what happens in the context of the next pandemic when it becomes a globally driven response from bureaucrats at the United Nations to whatever the next pandemic is going to be, coupled with artificial intelligence and other surveillance methods. I think it's going to be New Zealand times 10. And that really bothers me.
Well, that kind of fits with the model around the international criminal courts, and there's a reason
Yep.
why the U.S. hasn't signed up to it, which is if you go to a system like that, and God forbid the United States ever becomes beholden to an international service organization to bail us out of a problem, we will have to be responsive to their needs, right?
Yep.
So when you do a treaty like this in that way, you're ceding an incredible amount of sovereignty. And they will automate their systems because they don't have our constitutional structure in mind. Our constitutional structure is an impediment to the efficiency of a system like this. And unless you have, again, human interaction in the system on a regular basis, the system will not have the concept of our constitutional boundaries in mind. And I personally find that difficult. But there's some excellent people out there to go listen to. Virginia Tech has an incredible think tank up in the Beltway. The folks at Meta, the chief scientist at Meta, Jan LeCun, brilliant guy. You want to read about these kind of things. These are all approachable human beings who think about this stuff every day, and they're sensible humans. They're the people behind the science, but the difficulty comes when you're forced into implementing this kind of technology for missions that are proximate, that have national security implications. It gets ahead of the behavior of the system, and the systems become so complex because they get pushed at missions they shouldn't be pushed at. They exist, they do well in a certain mission, so people move them sideways to try new things. And there's some things that these shouldn't be used on now. And my guess is they probably are being. And so the outcomes aren't necessarily the best for us.
Wouldn't
Sociologically.
it be a great sort of structure if, we don't allow pharmaceutical drugs to go from the lab bench into the clinic without a fairly rigorous system of phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. None of that infrastructure exists as it relates to AI or artificial intelligence. We don't know what the implications are of turning chatbot loose on the public, whether it's Sydney or Bear or Bard or whatever it's going to be. We just seem to think that our betters, like your guy at Meta, knows how to do this, and is taken into consideration the well-being of everybody who's going to be impacted by it, rather than what it's going to do to Meta's stock price.
What's quite crazy about that is you have to look at the individual, Stan, and make a decision based on the individual.
I don't trust any of them.
I know, no, you're an old school guy from an old school world.
Yep.
I understand. I understand that because I feel it too. But I tend to look at the velocity around some of these programs, and then you have to look at the individual and suss them out individually. There's some pretty good people involved in it, but it is being pulled into the darkness, so to speak, and they will resist individually, but they can't be perfect. I think that what we have to do is we have to drive our elected representatives, and I know nobody on this call believes that there's that much momentum there, but we have to drive our elected representatives to build some fire breaks on this. And the difficulty with the fire breaks is the intelligence community has put this stuff to work well ahead of its prime.
Yeah, and there's a handful of people in Congress who understand this at all. So I don't think they're going to have the capacity to regulate this. If you've watched any hearing with respect to the testimony of the CEO of Google or Mark Zuckerberg or Jack Dorsey when he was testifying on behalf of Twitter in front of Congress, it was a shambles. Nobody up there on that panel, Senate or House, understood what the hell they were talking about. So I don't believe in the capacity of our elected representatives to regulate this. And so if it devolves into a government department function, then those people are basically looking in the mirror and talking to people just like them because of the revolving door situation. and I don't trust them to regulate this at all. I'm going to
I
leave
also
it
think
there.
there's way too much temptation for government.
Yes, I because the government is always going to try to figure out how to use it for their benefit.
Right.
It is, as we've seen with the Patriot Act, if we've seen with every other function that has come out of the response to 9/11, it never gets smaller. It always expands, and they always find a way to use it to keep an eye on you, even if it wasn't meant originally to do that. And don't talk to me about FISA courts, because I can point back to you at the FISA courts being corrupted by the FBI. I'm going to leave it there. We're going to move to the next slide, please, watcher, because this is something where I'd like to get Joe and Mike's feedback here, because the other area where the proliferation of AI is just moving exponentially is in the concept of national defense. And there's a handful of newsletters that I subscribe to. I'm no expert on this stuff, but I try to keep myself informed. Not a day that goes by that there isn't some new big contract for AI to be applied to some aspect of our national defense. And if it's there, you can assume that it's going on at a slightly different scale in the various countries that we're matched up against as peers or near peers from a defense perspective. You'll see that China is responding to our investment in artificial intelligence, just to keep pace with that. The Russians, to one degree or another. I don't know what the French are doing. I don't know what the Germans are doing, but it's AI is now ubiquitous in the concept of integrating it into the defense industry at all levels. And I just wonder, these are the same people who spilled data from an email server. Watcher, keep me honest here. How long was that going on?
Many weeks is all we know for sure.
Many weeks, so that email was in the clear, as it were. I don't have confidence that the same people who designed, produced, and procured the F-35, the LCS, I can keep going, the Osprey, okay, are going to design an artificial intelligence application for national defense that isn't susceptible to being hacked or bad design or failure. And so it really does start with the left-hand panel on this slide. And it's amazing to me that somebody had to write this if they've seen any Terminator movie. But give the Washington Examiner credit writing the headline that says artificial intelligence should not control nuclear weapons, particularly with the guy in the photo below the headline in charge.
Right.
Right?
Don't
So-
smash
That runs
hammer
on
with
AI.
Also, experts say that smashing hammer with balls could be detrimental. More at 11.
Yeah, I mean, we sort of hold this to be self-evident, but I always think of that black guy in Cyberdyne Systems who was, sort of blithely working away on the microchip that was found in the original Terminator, saying, "I'm so close, I'm so close," and it becomes seductive at a certain point. So, Mike,
It does.
you have an insight on this as a guy who writes technology in a defense sort of way in the context of your books. I mean, what's the right role for AI in the defense realm, in your view?
Well, my extensive experience. The last thing I did for work was program manager for an AI project, and the project very literally was to identify fish being thrown overboard. You're saying, what the fuck does that mean? Well, in certain fisheries,
Yeah, that I was thinking that exactly. So
in certain fisheries, regulations require the fishermen to account for discarded fish. So if you're fishing cod, and you pull a net in or scallops or whatever, you literally have to count every single one. And you as the fisherman are given, this is how many you can get in a year, 10,000, whatever it is.
this is
So
sustainability driven.
Yeah.
Conservation, sustainability.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, so, it's as with any regulation, it has a good, part of it, then as with any regulation, it also is an ass pain. So people are employed to either sit on a boat and watch the fishermen fish and count discarded fish. There's money that your taxpayer is paying for, or the fisherman has to spend time doing so. Well, anyway, the company I work for, they did it a little bit differently, and they would put cameras all over the boat and just record all the stuff and do all the counting later.
Hmm.
So there, someone is paying to count discarded fish. So if a cod was dead, you throw it overboard. It does you no good. It's not going to be any good for food. It still goes against your count. So you have to count for all those things. Well, the idea was to use AI to be able to identify, PID every single fish, and this goes to the defense thing. So an object thrown overboard either was something of interest or not. So we went through this whole AI process, and I'm going to segue into a slide up ahead. So if you take that, you have an image that you're counting or observing, whether it is relevant or not. You apply it to defense. Obviously, AI has a huge implication in the imagery kind of intelligence field, where these guys do nothing but look at photographs or images or video, full motion video, FMV, all damn day long, and there's so much of it. The next thing you know, you've got 10,000 little imagery guys doing this stuff on the payroll. So obviously there's an application for this to streamline your defense application of imagery. So there's great value, and that's why it has been pursued quite vigorously. It's a cost saving measure. But to go into the segue to I think your next slide or one of the slides talking about China is trying to build a consortium on AI specifically. That leads me to think in terms of, well, one of the reasons why AI has exploded, just say the last 10 years, is because of Moore's Law. And the power of computing is allowing this. Again, the volume of all this shit, whether it's Google, search words online, the volume is crazy big. So you need machines to sift through this stuff to make it manageable. And how do you do that? Well, the computing power and the chips themselves is how you're getting there. And that, to me, this China is seeking, a huggy feely. Hey, let's all work on this together. Yeah, okay, but that gives them access to these.
It's a troll net, is what it is.
Yeah, and I know you had that in your thing.
Yeah.
It gives them an opportunity and access to ASML chip making, yada yada, all that kind of stuff that I fear greatly. We do have some advantage, and we want to retain it. So be very careful of say specifically China when they're fishing for something, and it's probably to our detriment. But as far as just the general, so I specify imagery. You could think in the same terms for SIGINT, and listening through all the things that are listened to, and you're listening for certain keywords and whatnot. Obviously, you can still machine learn, train, your computers to pick up, Osama bin Laden in a voice track.
Right.
It's got great, great application, but at the same time, it
So
danger.
that's an Intel application, and I get that, and I understand how that is beneficial from the point of view of the operator there. But what I'm fascinated about, and I don't know enough to be able to make an intelligent decision on, is what is the true application of AI on the battlefield of tomorrow?
Well, I mean, so the defense stuff I don't know quite so much about, but I mean, there are missiles, there are weapon systems that have the same kind of imagery tracking mechanisms that can discern that is a friendly BMP
Mm-hmm.
versus, a Bradley, so you don't have, a friendly fire type situation. A little bit different application, but it's still kind of imagery based in that particular example.
Well, I don't know either, but I guess what I come down to is the simple equation that I get concerned about in terms of the human nature to tend to rely on these systems more and more and more as we become more familiar with them is the vulnerability that all of these systems have demonstrated to being hacked at one time or another. I mean, that's
Well,
the
let me-
asymmetrical response. You build
Yeah.
this glorious artificial intelligence system that is, communicating with the router in an F-35 and the router in a Bradley fighting vehicle and a router in an M1 Abrams and, the command laptop, the guy with the 3rd Battalion that's on the left wing and this and that and all the rest of that sort of stuff. And everybody's making decisions, fire decisions from an artillery battery on the context of this network that is driven by artificial intelligence. And if it gets hacked, it all goes to shit, does it not?
Of course.
Yes. And there's another application that's defensive that actually the Target Corporation began to work on for the government years and years and years ago, because I was part of it. It was analyzing human shopping behavior to predict who was stealing and who was not.
Yep.
So that information has been then forwarded to, you take the Marine Corps Combat Hunter program. If you load that data into an AI, you can have the drone hunt for the anomalous behavior in a particular individual in a particular village, right? Hey, this guy is acting different. And what we're going to end
you
up
put that in a
seeing-
closed circuit TV system in a target, you can pick the shoplifter out of the.
Yeah, and you can put it in a drone and pick out the bad guy about to blow himself up next to a tank.
Right.
But the problem is we will eventually get to a point where we give weapons release authority to that, because in the interest of time, it can react way faster than a human can. But no machine can discern like the human mind,
Right.
and that's my concern about it.
Right, I agree with that. So I think defense is an area that we're going to have to continue to watch as we move forward here. And we're not going to solve this
Well,
stuff.
hell-
We're trying to lay down some
Okay.
future threads for. Well, go ahead, Watcher. I wasn't trying to cut you off.
No, that's fine. This is actually one where I know, because I mean, again, Watcher doesn't give too much up about his past, but I have given away that I worked with an AI startup at one point, and let's just say that I know for a fact that the government the DoD specifically has been working with many companies that are doing things similar to what Netflix did a few years ago. And this is another one of those things where we're going to talk about civilian applications, and then I'll tell you about why the military might be interested in. Years ago, Netflix approached a company called Kaggle, or Kaggle. I can never remember exactly how to do that. But essentially, they said, hey, why don't you create a competition for us so that for an algorithm that can predict how many star ratings viewers are going to give something based on pre-production information that's available, right? So now what they're working on instead of like having one algorithm that does that, they're instead working on like continuous networks where multiple different algorithms compete in order to offer the right answer, and then only the one that is correct is rewarded. And so it continuously refines and gets better.
The rest are terminated, or what?
Well, not necessarily. It's just that there are actual teams behind these that are
This is
competing.
Sparta.
So if it's not profitable, then why keep running it? You know what I mean? You
It's,
got to make
it's machine learning.
Yeah.
So one of the very interesting applications for that is, hey, you know how the U.S. maintains these fucking enormous pre-positioned stocks all around the planet?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, wouldn't it be cool to be able to kind of predict what should go where based on an AI that just kind of seats itself deep down in your logistics system and make sure that the right things are at the right places at the right times based off of stuff that humans didn't even notice. I don't know. There's a million and one applications for stuff like this.
It
But
is,
yes, but the scary thing is
invasive.
how it's very highly invasive, and the really scary thing is how deeply. Look, let's talk about just basic ship navigation functions that we've lost because we've turned that over to automated systems that aren't even AI. How many ship collisions have we had in the last 5 years?
Train derailments.
Yeah, so, I agree.
So what Watcher's talking about is you end up with system vulnerabilities when you allow the systems to become so complex and so managed by what are described as AI systems that need care and feeding, right? So they age out. Again, they have half-lives, and if you don't understand that before the fact, they run off a corpus of data or a series of corpi that are massive structures of data. They only get what you give them. They don't tend to become self-aware, which is not necessarily terrible. They don't ask for more data. You have to give it to them. So they're limited by what you give them.
And not just give them, but how you weight what you give them and how you classify what you give them.
Well, which is really, that's the machine learning rub, right? Which is, we're seeing this now in the discussions around the public stuff. So what is it, Chat GPT or whatever? You're seeing these biases based on what we quote allow reinforced, but this is the machine learning piece. The transition will be when the systems begin to seek their own data, and that's a.
Shall we play a game?
Yeah, no, but that's a visual reference thing. That's a machine learning piece that the machines are somewhat capable of because they have real language processing. They have image processing. They can look at things from a computer vision standpoint. But it's the transition to them doing that on their own that is the rub now.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's why they have a half-life, because they have this incredible amount of data we've given them, but we've given it to them and we've created rules around it. And it comes back again to the quality of people you recruit and put in these positions.
Jim, we all saw Jurassic Park, right?
Yeah.
So I'm just saying,
nature finds a way.
Yeah. I just, it's.
I'm never going to get over that dinosaur with the big wing flaps over its head.
Exactly.
Just to add what Jim's saying, it's not just the quality of the people, it's the quality of the data, and over time, behaviors or whatever might change, and that's why he's saying the half-life. You then have to account for those new nuances to keep your machine learning whatever accurate. It's a self-looking ice cream cone. So it's an awful lot of work. In a business application, you have to look at the amount of work put into this. What's our return? What are we going to save? By not having to employ 1,000 more personnel. This stuff's not going away though. The allure of either saving money or even in the defense application, saving money.
Yeah,
I mean that really is at the end of the day.
That's part of it. But I don't want to leave the defense realm because we've gone 15 minutes on defense and we've yet to talk about the largest contract provider of artificial intelligence, both to DoD and the intelligence community. And that's a company out in California called Palantir.
Oh, boy.
Now, does anybody know what Palantir actually does? And
Sure.
it's a publicly traded company.
Careful! I hear if you say the name 3 times,
I know.
The men dressed in little black suits.
Saruman will show up.
Saruman will show up, or Alex Karp, one of the two.
Palantir is a bunch of professors in Southern California who had some great ideas, and they weren't public about their ideas. They went down the dark path, and it suited their capabilities well. So they've done well.
They have done well.
And then at a certain point, they said, "Well, we want to go have global acclaim for our public services as well." And that's a hard thing to break into because there's already somebody in it.
To break in, I thought Palantir was the one that mapped, associations between people. Terrorist
That's
A.
part of it. Yeah, that's part of what
Yeah.
they
Okay.
Analyst
Well,
Notebook originally came out of that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know they did a lot of the desktop stuff that people used in those jobs, and more power to them. They supplied some great stuff, but that was the path they chose to travel post 9/11, right? They went up the dark path. They went along the DARPA and QTEL path.
Mm-hmm.
They chose the big dark clients before the public market. Google chose the public market before the dark path, and they've turned out in different ways. But it's the same technologies and approaches, just with different trappings. It's mathematics and algorithms and large data exercises driven by PhD level smart guys who forget to bathe. And they're awesome people, and they've done great service. No, they've done great services for the country, but it has a lot of hair on it
Yeah.
because it occurred in places where there wasn't an incredible amount of scrutiny of outcome, and it requires some oversight from human beings. So,
Well, and the problem is that they woke up and found that if you spend all that time sleeping with the devil, you kind of become the devil yourself.
Yeah, but in LA, that's okay, man.
Well, so Mike hit on this earlier, and this is an important part, and that is the capacity for AI to learn and to do all these things is hand in glove tied to computing capacity. And so the untold aspect of this, and the rate limiting factor for all this, is the power of the computing used to drive the AI program or software or whatever. I'm not going to be precise about this, and so to that end, we weren't able to do it tonight, but I am going to catch up with her on Thursday. I have a friend who has had an interesting background in the agency and in DoD and other aspects, and she's now gone to work as the head of government contracting for one of the leading companies developing quantum computing. And so we're going to talk on Thursday because I'm gonna have her on, and I'd given her bio to some of you guys, I think all you guys, at an earlier point, and I want to try to understand what she can tell us about the other half of this equation as it relates to the capacity. I mean, this is HAL 9000 stuff, and so in our next iteration on AI, I'm hoping to have Jacqueline on to talk about the driving force behind the computing power here, and what is actually quantum computing, because it's a little mind bending, at least to me. I don't know about any of you guys or what you know about it, but it's a little,
wild.
It is a little mind bending, and is one more standard deviation out beyond sort of the kin of most normal people. And so the capacity and ability for it to get out of the lab, as it were, in terms of applications that general people may not want it to have, is pretty high. But we'll segue into quantum computing at a future time. Let's wrap up this AI discussion and talk about the sort of AI, big tech, general public use, what I'll call the TikTokization of AI in this area, and this worries me more than anything, in terms of just sort of throwing this chum into the water without really understanding what the implications of this are going to be, both as it relates to just the society in general, but particularly of having this in the hands of the sort of trinity of big tech, big media, and the government. I'm really concerned about our capacity to maintain even a modicum of understanding what the truth actually is in the construct of this sort of witch's brew of the ability to generate stuff that looks fairly real.
Well, and that's the real danger behind TikTok that people don't understand. They're like, oh, why would the Chinese want to spy on weird dance moves? Guess what? They're mapping body movements of particular people and getting images of them that could be used for deep fake technology, right? Learning how the human body moves and unusual things makes it an easy way for them to use that to generate deep fakes. And we're getting to a point where deepfake technology has gotten so good through the use of AI that they could trigger a war by making it appear as though someone gave a speech or conducted an act. It's troubling.
Yeah, I'm concerned that this is going to be used to obfuscate the truth or to perpetuate, things like there was no Hunter laptop, things like the Russian collusion narrative. I mean, we're going to look back at those as Model T operations in the future, with respect to the ability to create narratives out of whole cloth and propagate them through some of these means, like wildfire. So that
I wanted to say something
yeah,
that Joe mentioned, and I'm not disagreeing with you, Joe. You're right, but I also don't want to give the Chinese too much credit for great sophistication. China's more than happy for us to do TikTok so that our next generation's mind go to Jello.
Oh,
It doesn't have to. It doesn't have to be
Absolutely.
well,
more
no,
sophisticated than that.
it's a multifunctional weapon. There's no question about it. I mean, it both absorbs and collects data, but it also sort of deposits, calcium. It calcifies your brain.
And we're raising a generation of people who believe that influencer is a job. Now, says me, I'm an influencer, but anyway.
Yeah. Well, I understand all that, but I'm really concerned about our inability to discern what is true.
Right.
As these iterations become more and more proliferated and more sophisticated and more ability to A, create a narrative, and B, create supportive narratives out of whole cloth that make it look like it's actually real.
And you're right to add the media into that triumvirate. What feed, whatever is propagated will not be countered by a third party like a media unless it fits within the narrative that they want to drive. So that's part of the danger of this stuff is people will see it. No one's going to stomp on it and say this is all crap, this is bullshit, and not enough people will, let's say 1,000 people saw the images that were erroneous. Only maybe 100 people will get the correct data, but 900 will believe what they saw as being true.
Yeah, we see that with corrections to articles already, right? The bad article gets 10,000 views, the correction gets 67 views. And can you imagine a Kavanaugh confirmation hearing in a world where AI video and AI audio has advanced? You could, as Stan warned, create a rape allegation and video out of whole cloth. I mean, that's
the good example of the day. If you took a look and you could, if you really want to spend the time and research and substantiate what I'm about to say, you certainly could. X amount of words, X amount of images, X amount of minutes of videotape, whatever, during the Kavanaugh hearings, saying that she said, he did X to her, blah, blah, blah. Millions and millions and millions of minutes or whatever, quantification of that thing. And then you look at a couple years later, how many people are aware that she has come forth and said, yeah, I lied.
Yeah. We actually just talked about this yesterday. She came forward and said, I made the entire thing up.
Yeah.
Which, unless you're a booger-eating moron while you were watching it, that was clearly evident. Clearly,
Well, but see, the Department of Education, though, Mike, has specialized in creating rank after rank of booger-eating morons out of our public schools, and TikTok is a
Hey! You will eat the bugs and the boogers. All right.
People come here for our nuanced and educated discussion, like booger eating.
Yes, yeah. We're not going to resolve this, but this is actually the area that I think most threatens our way of life.
Yeah.
In the context of constitutional norms, human rights, the ability to maintain a government that is elected by an informed majority. I really think this pushes us more and more into the sort of, useful idiots as voters for many people. Because even if there is an alternative view to what's being put forward, it has to be propagated as a or as a response to that at the same speed to even be heard, because people's attention spans in social media and everything else get smaller and narrower, and it becomes fact because there's nothing that's offered to dispute it as fact.
How
You
many
see-
people still believe that Tina
but-
Fey said that she could see Russia from her house? It was, Sarah Palin, and it wasn't her; it was Tina Fey.
Yes, and so in a context where where the capacity for this sort of myth making is propagated, and if you don't think it's going to happen, all you have to do is, you don't have to spend much time on Twitter. Just go to the Twitter files in Taibbi's work and look at the way that the FBI had penetrated Twitter in the not too distant past. They were paying Twitter to carry out their instructions, and the instructions were being carried out by FBI people who were employees at Twitter.
Let me tell you about the Target Corporation Investigations Department.
Yeah.
Guys go from being the director of investigations at Target to an FBI HQ job and then back to Target. Doesn't really work that way in real life, but it does there.
Yeah. So this is something to watch. This is going to wrap it up. I for now, I'm really concerned that AI is going to be something that is used to divide us, to disenfranchise us, to disempower us in the context of whatever the new world order is that Klaus Schwab and other people are thinking up. And I'd ask you to fight it where you can. So I want to spend a couple of minutes, just because I think it cannot go unremarked on, the fervor out of the Beltway and out of NATO that's been generated this week, that we're going to win against the Russians. We can't allow the Russians to win, and we're going to win. And in my opinion, there's been a whole cavalcade of sort of shameful behavior by some of our elected officials. The woman on the left amongst them, sort of foremost amongst them. Joe, you want to describe the bracelet that
this bracelet is the equivalent of a bunch of ears cut off of Vietnamese guys, or teeth pulled out of the French. I mean, this is disgusting. But essentially, those are a 7.62 by 54 rimmed rounds. It's the casing heads on them, and they made her a bracelet and gave it to her. First of all, it's illegal for her to receive it, and second of all, that's just absolutely morbid. It's disgusting. It also classifies as a war trophy, and we don't do that anymore.
That's a bit of hubris, isn't it? I mean, it gives you some view into.
It's very similar to Hillary Clinton when we did Libya, and her crowing.
Yeah.
We came, we saw, we killed every, whatever she said. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it is.
And these are liberals, by the way. These are the peace-loving liberals.
This is Jane Fonda on the Zeus.
True.
She said, "We're going to give those Russians a hammering." Oh.
I mean, you guys, I'm not going to repeat every sort of comment that's been made over the last 72 hours. We've talked about it elsewhere. we've witnessed it. I mean, have you ever seen sort of the fever pitch that's built in it at this particular point? And there is no dissent within the body of elected officials that I can see.
Not even not even
no,
both parties. I mean, both parties agree.
no.
Well, there's fear of dissent.
Why?
Because I think they see this momentum behind all these folks wearing these flags and going along on the most corrupt country in Europe. And there is a feeling that democracy is at risk. What they don't understand are the nuances. There's been an incredible marketing campaign here, and it's been successful on behalf of Ukraine.
I'm sorry I have such a shit memory, but there was someone today, I heard on the radio, who was like that one single voice who was basically saying,
It's probably
we need to bring these people to the table to negotiate a peace. And I forgot who it was, but there is at least one person who said, you know, America needs to lead a peace talk effort to stop this war. And
That's literally the only person interested in peace talks right now.
I think so.
I think well-armed Corgi brings something up in the feed. Russia has just got this gravity around it, and so people, you bring it up, and you can get critical mass, and so there is critical mass in this argument now in American.
Well, it is consistent for the Democrat Party to lean in on this particular thing because of that Russia collusion. You know, they're essentially using this Ukrainian invasion to justify, oh yes, there really was a Russian collusion thing in 2016.
Continuing the message.
It's consistent for them. It is not really consistent for the Republican Party.
It's not, because to them, Zelensky was a bad guy during the impeachment. Right? He was doing what Donald Trump wanted, so he was a bad guy. Now he can do no wrong.
Well, I'm not saying that they're consistent in all things.
Let's be honest. They don't remember that those are the same person.
Right. I think Watcher's right.
Yeah, I think outside of a handful of folks like us who watch this stuff,
it didn't do nothing. If it was
right?
Colonel McGregor, I don't remember who he is. Can you write in the chat who that guy is? I just forgotten completely.
I don't know how to describe him. I mean, he's somebody who's been pretty bellicose on the other side as it relates to our involvement in Ukraine.
But he has a past. He has a significant past. I forgot what it is.
He does have a significant past. I can't recite it either. He's not uninformed. He's just outside of the current narrative, and so they try to paint him as crazy in the media, and so he's limited to sort of alternative media podcasts, things of that nature. Then there's a couple out there that he's on routinely, and I think he's gotten frustrated because his commentary has become a bit more unsound. By my take, and so but nobody in a position of elected power, let me put it that way, and even Tom Massey of Kentucky, I don't think he's a committee chairman in the House. He may be, but he's not of defense or any of the others. Nobody in a position of power that I've heard is willing to say anything that is outside the norm of we're going to win. And even McConnell today was talking about there is no alternative to us winning. The word "us" was used specifically, and so the demonization, despite everything that we've done to create this situation, the Civil War, the Slavic Civil War, of which there's really not a whole lot of pushback available. I mean, we created Maidan, we created the revolution ahead of that in Ukraine, and we've done everything we've done since 1994 to get to this moment as it relates to NATO. Despite the warnings that we'd gotten from the other side of this, we disregarded that. And so there we are all in as a body politic in this country. We are all in on Ukraine's going to win. And I don't think anybody's thought through what the ramifications of that are going to be if it happens.
Lindsey Graham himself today said we're going to fight to the last man.
Yeah, he did. And what I found really, actually, those words were offensive to me. But what was more offensive to me was that photo with Blumenthal standing behind him. Of all people, Mr. Stolen Valor in Vietnam, to be standing there with the Queen of South Carolina as she proclaimed that we're going to fight to the last man.
Well, these things all play directly into Putin's hand, right? We're giving Putin the ammunition he needs. He's said all along he's been fighting NATO. And so hey, let's make him right. It's just absolutely silly.
I've forgotten the agenda. Do we tie this in with China in our agenda?
No, yeah. There's no tie into China, Mike.
Yeah. So again, here we are.
Yeah, there is.
So we're cheerleading, and I'm really amazed at how far the various Murdoch outlets, the Post, Fox, etc., the Wall Street Journal have taken this line, hook, line, and sinker. So even elements of what are meant to be conservative media are all in on the narrative that says, we're going to see this through to the end. I mean, there's no separation between Brit Hume and Malcolm Nance at this point. So think about that for just a minute. And I think that is incredibly dangerous, because we're playing with a conflict this time that could be orders of magnitude greater in terms of lethality, but it's also almost instantaneous lethality. If we haven't learned anything out of this Ukrainian conflict, the lethality is instantaneous, given the weaponry that's been created. I mean, we're talking about casualties in 1 year, and you get various numbers, but take whatever numbers you want on both sides, add them up, and they're starting to approach civil war, which is the deadliest war in U.S. history. They're starting to approach civil war sort of levels of total casualties, killed, captured, wounded. So it's mind-boggling. And if this becomes a broader conflict involving NATO and whatever the other pact is going to be called, China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, it's people won't even be able to take a breath, and before they're just gobsmacked with the lethality that comes out of this.
Well, and we're so used to 20 years of fighting in a low-tech insurgency that we have no idea what those casualty numbers are going to look like. And the public opinion is going to shift the first time you lose 5,000 people in a day.
Well, wait a second, Joe. Whose people? 5,000 a day. Who?
Ours.
Russian or U.S. specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
First time we lose one entire aircraft carrier, everyone dead to a missile, the public will tap out.
Well, and I ask myself the question, why are we doing this? Why are we pushing this narrative when we know that our military is not optimized to take on either a one-front war on behalf of NATO, because NATO's not going to do it. The unfunded codependents in NATO aren't going to do anything. It's going to be ISAF all over again. I saw Americans fight all over again. And so even though it's in their backyard or on their home soil, with the possible exception of the Poles, but that remains to be seen. So why are we doing this? Why are we steering into the skid when we know that we've depleted stocks of key weapon systems, when we know that our Navy is not up to snuff, when we know that our tankers can't be used, our tanker fleet is grounded. We can't refuel airplanes in the air at this particular point.
I don't know, Stan. I saw Estonia, the country with probably the smallest military in the world. They were talking pretty tough today. So
Yeah, yeah. So I think that stands on its own. But anyhow, there is a counter narrative to this, and it's being developed on a daily basis. And it seems to me as though poster on the poster on the left is going to become relevant again. And so I wanted to posit the question. Jim, you were supposed to research this. How do you say lend lease in Chinese?
Don't have it for you, Stan. But is that Keanu Reeves? I my eyes are difficult. I you know we have a really interesting challenge here, which is we haven't prepared our population properly for understanding the risks that government's bringing on them, because it's just coming too quickly. Uh, somebody mentioned, yeah, Newland should be jailed. We have a bunch of folks who really want their view of the world to come to pass in Washington, and it's created an interesting vacuum of policy. So we're really driving this, I think, for the political cretia, right? We're trying to give Biden a cover. That the political Washington is trying to cover the president and the government with a war, with conflict, with risk, for all the wrong reasons. That's kind of what I'm seeing here.
I think that they're bankrupt from a policy perspective. They don't know what else to do.
But this is right. This is on their laps, right?
And so what's astounding to me is the very same policies that all the Democrats, and literally almost all, and to the extent that they weren't as far left then as they are now, it's even more gobsmacking. Everything that the neocon Republicans were chastised for as it relates to Iraq, Afghanistan not so much, but Iraq in particular, okay? The phony war that was created in Iraq because of the weapons of mass destruction and all of that stuff that Colin Powell was pilloried for, testifying before the United Nations. We're doing that and then some. And everybody is in on the game. The leftists who wouldn't stand for that stuff in Iraq, even Iraq in the Kuwait invasion didn't want any part of it. Okay, the good Iraq war. Everybody is all in on this narrative at this particular point, and you have to ask the question why. I think they realize that there's no way for them to maintain political power absent this, and they're doing it, and they're ignoring those things that continue to weaken the fabric of the country. We can talk about the southern border. You all know how I feel about that. We can now talk about the northern border, which seems to be stepping up in terms of illegal crossings. We can talk about fentanyl. We can talk about infrastructure, for God's sake. Okay, train derailments and power stations and everything else that makes the fabric that makes this country work, that would support the war machine that they want to activate, is being ignored at breakneck speed. And we're just acting like we're the baddest. We're going to go sort corn pop out behind the gymnasium. And I don't think we've got the chops to do it at this particular point.
Meanwhile, we ran from Afghanistan as fast as we could.
Stan, we don't. And we need to.
Well, I'm trying to be charitable, Mike. I mean,
there is no charity. We've given $150 billion of charity. That's charity. What this country needs to do is to come to grips with the idea we are not the sole superpower. Even like through the 90s, we were breaking our arm, patting ourselves in the back. How fucking we're the superpower. We're the only. And China just kind of sat there and listened and said, that's pretty disrespectful. The only thing I could think, Stan, and I'm trying to be charitable, I guess. Why are the Republicans back in this whole thing? Because there has been some noise lately, from politicians, etc. Washington, that they're kind of coming to the realization that yes, China really is kind of a threat to us, the United States of America. And I think that, our leaders cannot find another way to pursue some kind of strategy against China other than the most linear thing possible, which is this war. That's the only thing I can think of as to why they have fallen in line and saluting the flag and saying, "Yep, this is the way to go." That's the only thing I can think of.
Well, there's a lot of money being made out of this as well, to be crass about it. But Mike, I'll take issue with that analysis in this regard. Now, I don't disagree that that's how some of those people think. But if you really believe that China is the existential threat, and I hear it every day, some talking head or some congressman or some senator talking about China's a real threat, China's a real threat, China's a real threat. Okay, if China is the real threat, why don't we segregate and focus our efforts as it relates to China? Okay, and not try to pick a fight with China and Russia at the same time. That doesn't make any sense to me.
So far, we're not disagreeing.
Okay.
I'm waiting for your disagreement.
No, I'm just saying.
I'm
If the road to Beijing is through Moscow, that seems like twice the path.
I think you're absolutely correct. And and that's what I'm saying is these people can't figure out that relationship, and the only thing they can stupidly think is the direct line to cut that Gordian knot is through this war. And maybe part of the, maybe it is the money and all.
Well,
again, I'm trying to be charitable. We are talking national security, not just national security, whether or not the United States of America is going to exist 10 years from now in some kind of format that we could possibly recognize.
Gentlemen, remember that all the people that are talking about this, all the people that are making these decisions, all the people that we're complaining about don't believe, like, that we're talking national security with people who don't believe in nation states. They believe that nation states is nothing more than economic zones.
Right.
Yeah, because anybody who wants to talk about a nation state cannot abide the state of play on our southern border. You can't. That's cognitive dissonance to the fifth power, right?
Right.
And so that the nation state is not what drives their process, but it is the well-being of the ruling class, the people inside the Beltway, and Jim and I talk about this constantly in terms of the sort of ignorance that exists all inside the Beltway, all around inside the Beltway, and they're red pilled, and it's ridiculous. I love this country. I bitch about it a lot because of the direction it's going in. I love the people of this country. I have nothing but disdain for the political class in this country, and that means almost every one of them.
Well said.
Given what I see,
I hear you, Stan. I'm gonna raise you.
Okay.
Call you. I love about 50% of the people in this country. 50% of the people in this country. I can't say that there's a whole lot they have to offer me, and
Bingo.
A lot that I agree with. I just can't.
Well,
I just literally
can't.
can't.
You're right about that. I agree, but I don't take any pleasure in bashing our government, except that I have no alternative but to bash people who I see acting every day in a manner that's contrary to the well-being of the people.
I don't think we're bashing them to be malicious. It's not bashing because we just want to be hateful and say bad things. We're trying to show there are deficiencies that rational thought can defeat.
Yeah.
There is a path forward to get out of this hole that we're in. We just need to take the right steps.
Well, I think, and Jim, I'll invite your thoughts on this because we've talked about this a bit. I think that Russia and I think they know this to a degree. I think Russia becomes the Western facing, or the Eastern, I don't know, the other polarity, if you will, of Chinese proxies. North Korea on one hand, one Russia on the other, for sort of engaging with the forces of the West. And I think the Chinese are going to supply whatever they want to supply to the Russians on certain terms and conditions. And the North Koreans are going to continue to rattle sabers at the Australians by remove, and directly at the Koreans and the South Koreans and the Japanese. And I think China's going to play both of them against the middle on this. And
I've said way too much, but you just said something that just triggered me. Certain terms and conditions. Now I want to go back to about a year ago,
yeah,
or somewhere, where Joe said something to the effect of, "Hey, you know those guys are like the Azog battalion buggers. Yep. They're bad people. They're bad motherfuckers." And I think the discussion we had back then, I said, you know, you're correct, Joe. And if we had a president that was totally engaged in this, he would have seen an opportunity to instill within the process of giving money to put some terms and conditions upon the recipients of our money and say, okay, that $50 million or whatever it was way back when that he promised has strings attached. One is you will right now cease and desist with the Azog battalion. They all go away. You will, at the very least, publicly denounce its formation in your, quote, democracy. That was a year ago. And we didn't do that sort of thing.
Didn't do it.
Had we done something like that, I did believe at the time that Russia was invading a sovereign. I mean, it is an issue of territorial integrity. Absolutely. Whether it's NATO, all that, that's all kind of flaky stuff. And then you might have had a legitimate backing of both the Republican Party and the American people if we had started putting some standards into this whole thing. But we didn't. And now this president is expecting us to say, oh, yes, let's pursue this great endeavor. One, at the precipice of China, who's going to, put a great deal of money in behind. We are clearly looking at a possible nuclear war, backed with China. No, World War III. Certain things could have been done a lot smarter earlier on to get public support that were not done. And now you have these, great rhetorical flourishes in speechifying, and we're on the wrong, quote, the wrong side of history. We're supporting guys that have Nazis, literal Nazis in their formation. So, the choice between good and bad is pretty foggy. I'll shut up.
No, it is foggy, and let's close this out because it segues into the last slide, and we'll be brief about this. But with all of that as backdrop, with no clear rationale as to why we're doing this and what we stand to gain out of it, and particularly without analysis of what are the repercussions of it. Okay, economic. We talked a little bit about the potential economic repercussions of just a situation in Taiwan. But if this goes into a broader conflict simultaneously with the three near peer powers, Russia, China, and the United States, in two theaters, both Europe and Southeast Asia, I think we're in for some deep trouble economically. And I laughed a little bit at somebody was joking in Twitter today about the guys who are going to be serving draft notices in Appalachia may not come back. Okay, in the context of a broader conflict. But so with all of the with so little upside, okay, because Ukraine's going to be Ukraine. It's Chinatown, Jake. Forget about it. And with Ukraine's going to be Ukraine. With all of the limited upside and all of the massive downside associated with this situation, you have to ask yourself, why is this going on at this particular point? And I have a theory that I'm going to put out there because I think I've thought about this. And I think it's got two components. I think Biden is struggling to make a decision about, is he going to run again? Is he not going to run again? I think he wants to run again. But I think they've decided that the only way he's going to be able to run again, given his polling and all the rest of this sort of stuff, and his continued physical and mental diminution, that the only way that, and we talked about this a year ago in terms of his desire to go into the midterms as a wartime president, I think all that's left in the context of this is to escalate his importance to the body politic as a wartime president. That I think this is a part of the 2024 narrative. And I think the other piece of that is that I think they've figured out that from an economic perspective, we can't pay our debts. And so this is also a war of economic opportunity, because what's going to happen if we get into this conflict is A, economic disruption, and B, inflation. And despite everything that
hold on, Stan.
Go ahead.
Economic opportunity for whom?
For the body politic, not the people of the country, but for the body politic. Okay. And so they're going to want to pursue a guns and butter strategy, just like Lyndon Johnson did during Vietnam. And we're not going to turn down any spending. We're going to continue to borrow money, and because we're leading the war effort, we're going to sell war bonds. We're going to continue to do whatever is going on in the face of the flight from the dollar from an international perspective. It solidifies our role as the hegemon on the planet if we're leading NATO in this valiant charge against the Russians and the Chinese. And it's going to drive inflation, and the only way to monetize that debt that you see in the pink curve on that graph, in the face of the income and expenditures that you see in the graph above it, black being income and blue being expenditures, those curves aren't crossing. They're not coming together, despite the fact that we're at our debt ceiling now and people are talking about a default. That won't happen because it undercuts all of the plan that I'm talking about. It's really, I think they're trying to drive inflation because the only way to pay this debt off is to inflate your way out of it, is to monetize it through devaluation of the dollar. And we've seen bouts of that in the past. And that's not a pathway that any ordinary American is going to want to see. Because those of us who lived through the 70s and the 80s, my first mortgage on a house, and I was working for the bank. I was the chief of staff for the CEO of the bank, and my bank buddy rate, okay, my employee rate for the first mortgage I had on a house was 14.5%, and I was happy to have it. We're going to see that again. The 70s are coming back. If Biden is elected and we get into this war, the 70s are coming back. That's my view. I'd like you to pick it apart or tell me I'm full of horse feathers.
You're full of horse feathers. But what was that? Is this Welcome Back Carter, right? Wasn't there a sitcom, Welcome Back Carter?
Yeah, there was.
Yeah. We're suffering a death of incrementalism on domestic politics. Domestic politics have taken over pretty much everything. So all of this foreign stuff is just a cover for the failure of their domestic policies. And they're running into 2024. And if he doesn't become a wartime president, he's got absolutely no cover. And the party itself, the Democrat Party, has no cover. So, but I take affront to your use of pink and blue and green. I just don't think
I didn't do that. The congressional
but
budget.
they're just not. If you use pink, blue, and green, you can't. There's no mathematical override that allows it. So I don't care about your data. Your go away data, bad data. It's got the wrong coloring. we're in serious problems with our treasury, and I think it's interesting to watch a lot of the point of the spear activity that's going on vis-a-vis Russia, Ukraine, and China is treasury led. Uh, they're forcing OFAC and all these people to get out there and become the point of the spear. And honestly,
to no effect.
no, well, there is effect, but the effect is not what they're hoping, because uh, you can't keep goring people with the same problem. And we explained to the Chinese 20 years ago that Swift and OFAC would be a weapon we'd use, and the weaponization of the dollar is kind of waning. So we're going to be in tough straits trying to find a passive economic outlet here, and that's, I think, why they're leading with the Pentagon on this Ukraine thing. I don't think they have other options to offset our financial vulnerability.
No,
And
I don't either. I think it's all a shell game, and when the and or musical chairs, and at some point the music's going to stop, and there's going to be people without chairs.
yeah, and somebody needs to, the questions that need to be asked are, hey, Mr. President, how do you propose we offset these incredible debt structures? And the response of, you're targeting Social Security and Medicare, that only has certain legs on it because nobody is. So somebody needs to get out in front of this. The messaging campaigns and the domestic education of the electorate needs to step up. But people are burned out. They're tired.
They're burned out, and Jim, and that cycles back to the last point of our AI discussion, and that is, at the time that this election gets underway, people are not going to be able to discern what the real truth is.
Yeah, it's going to be hard. I agree. So people have got to double down and start paying attention to the data out there. Get smart and diversify your news sources, please. I mean, that's what I'm asking, citizen to citizen. Please diversify your news sources. And when I bring up the word citizen watcher, what do you bring up? You bring up Starship Trooper knowledge.
I'm doing my part.
Yeah, I don't have a cue,
Do your
but
part.
yeah,
Do your
yeah,
part.
yeah.
No, I can't disagree with it. And everybody here is.
And there are people in the chat, Karen amongst them, sort of, taking us to task by saying that Biden isn't a wartime president. I know that. But Biden wasn't a presidential candidate in 2020. He was living in his basement and he still got elected. So it is, it's an emperor has no clothes sort of thing, but they're gonna push it for all it's worth. And to go back to Mike's point, 50% of the country believes it because they have no other fact set to judge it by.
Yeah, and if it doesn't appear in one of the sources of record, right? So I can't tell you how many people I know who, if they don't see it in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the LA Times, it isn't of record. And at our age, with our
That's a fatal
experience
flaw.
levels,
That's a
yeah,
fatal flaw.
at our age, with our experience level, you would expect the people you would be at a dinner table with to understand that those are biased organs now. They're not to be listened to without offsetting data sources. So diversify your data sources. Go out there and seek and search, learn, take the time. Don't listen to people like us, because we just divert you from the norm. But pay attention to other data sources, please.
Brian, thank you for your comment and your compliment. Brian Anderson in the chat. We appreciate that a great deal. And to answer the question, who's going to be his VP? I think that at the end of the day, I think it's going to be Gavin Newsom. I think that deal has been struck. As horrific as that sounds, given the experience in California, I think that it's going to be. And that's why Pelosi won't go away. It's why she's at the Munich Security Conference, because that's her nephew, and the Pelosi crime machine wants to make sure that he has a chance. And unlike the Kennedy crime machine, they don't want to have to pay for Chicago in an election. They want Gavin to become president when Joe times out. By that I mean 25th's out.
There's going to be a shit show around that exchange of power, though.
Yeah. But on the other hand, while that's going on, the Republicans are going to be eating their own because we've got Mike Pompeo and Mike Pence and Nikki Haley and whoever else. Vikram Ramadhamalama, what's he? Is he a Republican?
I don't
guy
know,
that
but
declared yesterday.
there's definitely going to
Yes.
be a couple of Curry Tiffins going on in South Carolina.
Okay, I just we're going to eat our own, arguing over Donald Trump or Ron DeSantis or Mike Pence or whomever. And all of the idiots in the Rhino wing of the party are going to sow further discord in that process.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue on your Biden thing. I fully believe you're correct. You know, this is the Hail Mary attempt is what it is. But what is really kind of ironic is, had he the foresight, a year or so ago, to discern the trouble the country was in. In other words, what does Mr. Biden have to sell right now going into the actual election cycle? And that's what we're talking about. He's gonna the wartime president. Well, you still could have backtracked that a year ago when he got into this, and he could have easily seen, where inflation was, yada yada, and knowing he was in trouble. And he said, okay, I'm going to build the case of being a wartime president, blah, blah, blah. And he could have helped himself a great deal by doing exactly what I said a couple of minutes ago. You're talking about the Joe thing, the Joe Dolio thing, the Azog battalion. In other words, he could have put himself and the country on the path of the high moral ground, seized that key terrain of high moral ground, and then had an actual moral basis to say, we're going to do this war in Ukraine. And he failed to do that. And it's too late now. You can't undo. I suppose
Are we ever going to get a congressional vote on a declaration of war?
Of course not.
No.
Chicken shit motherfuckers not going to do that. But had he done something like that, predictive, he might actually have a shot. He has nothing to sell.
He has one thing to sell, Mike, but the shelf life of it, I think, is very limited. What Joe, and you heard it again even after the midterm elections, and you saw it in the January employment report, where they concocted 517,000 jobs that were created in January. 60 days after that, Marty Walsh resigns as labor secretary because he knows that there's a revision coming to that number.
And they washed the data.
And he doesn't want to be around. But what he has going for him right now is the unemployment rate. But the Fed is going to take care of that for him as we continue to go higher for longer. Everybody on Wall Street had convinced themselves the Fed's done. They're going to be cutting interest rates by the end of 2023. Nuh-uh, because inflation's not going anywhere.
Well, what about all these reports, big numbers, from Facebook, from Google, whatever, big numbers of layoffs. Yeah. So he may not have this unemployment.
Well, but this my point, to finish my point, he's got about 4 more months of being able to blow that horn, because this economy, in the face of higher interest rates, and I think we've got another 1.25 to go on the Fed funds rate. That's
easy.
50 basis points higher than the revised realistic consensus now on Wall Street after 4 days of getting their head handed to them. I think we've got another 125 or so, and that's before the real war inflation kicks in. Okay. But this economy is going to puke jobs in the second half of 2023. We are going to see layoffs like you're not going to believe. And that's not going to be 15,000 guys at Facebook. It's going to be much, much deeper than that, because people, and it's going to be small businesses who can't afford it any longer.
Well, Stan's touching on something that's interesting.
Excuse me one second, Jim, then I'll shut up. Small businesses who lived through the pandemic are so scared of not being able to hire people back at some point in the future, they're feather bedding, they're warehousing employees not to have to go through that again. That's going to end because they're going to run out of money.
And so one of the things that people are people are not taking into account is the guys with the massive investments in AI that have all this incredible infrastructure to predict risk. Their margins on what they're willing to lend at is so far above the number that you're looking at from the Fed. So the ability to actually get capital into the market now, the margins are staggering. So what used to be considered ridiculous hedge fund margins of 12 to 15%, people are now paying 20% for money. Money is not flowing in the lending world, and mortgage companies are backing down. People are pulling out of industry because they're looking at this saying, we have no way to predict this kind of risk. So it's a really interesting challenge, which is even with these high rates and even with this inflation, you've got to have people who are willing to assume the risk of where it's going. And it's a tough.
So
Let me ask you guys,
yeah.
Between the two of you, I think the answer would probably be a resounding yes. I don't know, but I'll ask. If you were the opposing party, call yourself whatever the hell you want, would you run purely on an economic platform? I'm going to fix the United States of America's economy. Do you think that would be a winning platform?
I think that becomes an America First platform, and that starts with let's disentangle ourselves from foreign aspects because, and this is how you get to your point, we have a lot to fix at home before we can go fight overseas. Okay.
I would just want to avoid that particular marketing campaign.
Why? It happens to be true.
I yes, and I agree with it 100%. But it becomes, a hammer that they just beat him with. Like January 6th, same thing. So
well, I don't know that
you have to be clever in the way you sell it.
I don't know that Trump's going to be the candidate in 2024. I think they're laying in the weeds for him. I think there's multiple grand juries, and you saw the foreperson of the Atlanta grand jury broke all tradition by having an interview with CNN to talk about the deliberations and the investigation of Trump in this Atlanta grand jury for election violations. I mean, this is kangaroo justice, but I won't go into that today. But the point is I think they're going to indict Trump before he
for something.
For something,
and it doesn't matter.
It doesn't matter. I don't think Trump's going to be the candidate. So I think his gesture today in East Palestine or Palestine or however the hell they say it, I think that was wonderful. I think he made Biden look like an ass, delivering water and going to McDonald's in East Palestine, Ohio. I think his instincts are there, but I just think the system is set up that it's going to incapacitate him to run successfully. And they won't give up until he's indicted on multiple things, and they're going to tarnish him to the point where he's not going to be able to run. I hate saying that, but I think that's what's going to happen. So to go back to your point, I do think that the message needs to be a populist one in the opposition. I started to call it the Republicans. I don't think that exists any longer. I think the opposition has got to be a populist one, and it's got to be based on economic renewal. Because we're in deep, deep trouble. Nobody talks about the fact that we can't borrow any money, and we're shuffling Peter to pay Paul at a national level, and we're one black swan event away from 1929 in this current construct. We really are. And if that black swan event were, let's say, the repercussions that we talked about in episode 2 of a blockade or invasion of Taiwan, or the repercussions of a nuclear weapon going off on the continent of Europe from an economic perspective, we're in deep shit. Joe, you're silent. You're
no.
surprised.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt you.
No, that's all right.
I would say Moldova, right? An invasion of Moldova by either Russia or Ukraine. Either way.
Something. So some Archduke Ferdinand moment that you can't see, okay? That you don't see coming. Black swan, asymmetrical outcome, whatever. Our fragility right now as a country from an economic perspective is far, far greater than what Mr. Fitzelfritz is out sort of walking and talking live. Okay.
I apologize. I need to interrupt because we
Yeah.
just got a double super chat. He gave us two $5 for to say the same thing twice
Okay.
over on Rumble
Really
from
means it.
Joseph Kerwin, which is when he says, "I love that you guys have an evening show now."
So do I. Thank you.
Thanks, Joseph.
So I just think that we are acting like, our geopolitical position has become Joe Biden's position in his conversation about whacking corn pop, with all of the credibility that is associated with his stories about whacking corn pop or wanting to take Trump out behind the gymnasium and beating the shit out of him. Our credibility in that in a foreign policy and economic construct is no more credible. It's a manifestation of Biden's bullshit that he talks about himself. And we'll just make something up. Yeah, there I was. I thought I was Polish because I was being raised by Puerto Ricans. I mean, there's no end to the creation of the lies, the absolute fabrication of shit out of thin air to justify whatever stupid position he wants to take.
So, Stan, how do you really feel about the president?
I abhor the man. I really do.
You're almost. It'd be better if you were verklempt. I'm at the point. I'm at the same point Stan is, and what I find really interesting is our whole global policy is based on his individual political risk.
That's it.
And it's terrifying to me as kind of an old guy who's studied these things for many, many, many years. But what really this is killing me is that the American people are not paying attention to the nuance of what's being said. And I understand they're busy supporting their families and spending their days working, but we're going to get handed a bag of really unpredictable stuff. And as Stan said, we're one event away from a crisis. And we saw what happened in Turkey with 2 7.0 earthquakes just, within hundreds of miles. You imagine if LA gets taken out by one. And I had this conversation this week because it's what I do for a living. But all it takes.
Don't give me hope like that.
All it takes is one event. And these events are overwhelming on national resources and capital and capabilities. And they take out big pieces of infrastructure and capability. And more importantly, it distracts families and citizens away from their roles. Doesn't matter what they do, but their missions are interrupted by crisis, and they go take care of their families. So as a country, we're very vulnerable, and we really need to start thinking a little more clearly. And under Biden, we're just not doing it. I'm not seeing the policy. I'm not seeing the outcome. I'm not seeing the improvement in the capabilities of our country. So it puts me in a situation where I'm very concerned, but I don't see an outcome that's good before the next election. So I'm just crossing my fingers and hoping we don't have a critical event.
And some of you know this. We're talking about the next election as if it's going to make a difference. I've crossed that Rubicon a long time ago. Somebody, I'm Corgi in the chat.
Thank you.
Is talking about, and thank you very much for the contribution. I think the fix is in. I think that whether it's Gavin Newsom or Joe Biden and Newsom on a ticket or somebody else in that construct, I think they're gonna engineer the outcome. And they're going to engineer the outcome by suppressing the Republican vote because they're going to take Trump off the table. We haven't seen DeSantis stand up to the sort of scrutiny that goes on in the presidential campaign. I don't think Pompeo's electable. But even if he was, I think we're going to see another fortified election. And I think that the 50% of the folks that Mike was talking about that do think the way that we think, and that's a mass generalization. I apologize for that. But I think the sort of silent majority, to use a Nixonian term here for just a minute, the silent majority is going to be fed up first quarter of 2025 as Gavin Newsom is on the steps of the Capitol being sworn in as the 47th president of the United States. I think that's going to be the boiling point for so much of what is bubbling below the surface in many of us at this particular point. And I think all bets are off. And that gets you into the current rage on Twitter about the discussion of a national divorce. That's bullshit. Don't believe it. But that's another show. I just think we're in a very, very difficult place. And we talked about a 7.0 earthquake. We got 6 million people in the country. We don't know who they are from 100 and some odd countries. And I guarantee you there are bad actors in that mix. And we're starting to see what the ramifications are of industrial accidents in this country. Train derailments, one thing and another. It doesn't have to take a cataclysmic
Can I interrupt
series
you
of
for a
events.
second?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if this is true or not, but I'm looking at the live feed from Twitter. Did Fetterman just die?
Don't know.
I'm seeing memes about it. So
yeah,
I'm not
so I don't know if
sure.
it's bullshit or if it's actually true.
I'll look it up.
Don't know.
Really?
Well, all that really means is that the governor of Pennsylvania is going to appoint somebody to take his place. And the government of Pennsylvania is a raving goofball Democrat.
Well, and I do want to take this
You mean
opportunity
it's
to
what-
remind everyone.
Wife?
I guess
Yeah.
he could. I think that's a poor choice. If I were the governor, the last thing I would do is appoint Fetterman's wife as his replacement.
Well, listen, I think it's appropriate that I now remind everyone that technically, that's Fetterman's monster. Fetterman is the name of the scientist who created him. So,
Right. Fetterman is the name of the doctor who made him.
there you go.
All right. So I think we're sort of at our limit for this.
I'm not seeing any news anywhere of it. Like,
I don't know, Mike. We'll have to circle
Okay,
back.
it's probably just a meme. Yeah.
But it's by the way, I mean, he jumped the line at Walter Reed pretty easily, didn't he?
Sure did, huh?
Huh? So
yeah.
it's everywhere you look, there's something that just is not right.
Just
Not
gets
right,
your
right.
goat. Just gets your goat.
It does. So let's go around the horn for closing thoughts. Jim, you're in the square adjacent, so you start.
All right, just stay aware, double source all your information, support your neighbors and communities, and pay attention to the data out there, because it's we're not getting 100% of the truth out of the systems that are supposed to give us information. So be a discerning consumer, and you have questions, talk to people you trust, and build out your community of friends. And if you buy a Baofeng radio, ask Joe how to use it.
Joseph, are you packed and ready to go?
I'm about to start loading stuff in the car so I can get an early start. But that's my point. Get out and do the things. Touch grass, get out, enjoy nature, because you might be forced to soon. We are headed for a bad place in this country. It might not be as bad as some people think, but something is going to happen, and it's going to be difficult and painful. And you should prepare yourself and your family for that to come through it as well as you can. So,
I think by now everybody knows about Joe's books. Buy them. If you don't got them, buy them. And I think where. You can either contact Joe directly or you can do it on Amazon. I think we're blaming it on Demp that book 5 isn't anywhere on the horizon. Is that right?
Well, that's the plan.
No, actually, we're blaming it on the Canadian guy, Arctic Boy. He's got a rewrite due to
Well,
me,
I think that was an unfair shot, but go ahead.
He's
Mike,
not here, so
we'll
do it.
Mike, any last thoughts
Well,
before you
I'm going to tell you can't trust those Canadians. Just telling you.
Yeah.
I know.
I've been here for months observing these people, and they're just
listen. That guy wrote a short story where he stole my wife, literally.
Listen. They drink their milk out of bags. Anyone who does that is not to be trusted.
Hey, listen,
Psychopathic behavior.
Well, I think South Park has it best. I think with the Canadians, their mouths all their head opens up and stuff. They're easy to spot on South Park. But
I got Canada tattooed on my arm, so I hope everyone that's Canadian out there realizes I love you like a redheaded stepchild. I do.
Now, do they do that with syrup or ink?
Red syrup.
Molson.
And let me tell you something. When it comes to confections, the Canadians can excel. They make, obviously, like Joe was saying, they make great syrup, but they make some candies that are pretty damn good too. And any of you in the chat that are listening, you poor bastards, first thing I'd say, if you read my books, I'm far more articulate than Booger Eating Moron. So there's a written Mike Bennett, and then there's this other person that speaks, and he sounds like an idiot.
That's because he uses AI to write his books.
Because I use AI, because I can program the shit out of anything.
Yeah.
But hey, if you have read the books, please write a review. My reviews numbers are horrible. When I look at how many books I've sold and how many reviews I have, it's horrible. So Well-Armed Corgi says Mike's books are awesome. Thank you. But if you guys have a chance, just a short review. Jesus, right? Mike's books are awesome. That's it.
Okay.
That's all you got to do. It's easy.
You have your orders.
Anyway, it was a good show. Thank you. hey, and let's give a hand to Watcher. I mean, here's this guy. He's got his finger on the pulse. We're yammering about God knows what. I am, and he's keeping track on what's going on with Rumble. With
Watcher has been doing yeoman's work, particularly since he's been a little under the weather for a bit, but signs are pointing to a full recovery. So we're glad to hear that. And
they cut the alien specimen out sometime in 2 weeks or so.
Yeah,
we'll see.
Yeah, the face hugger is going to be removed, so that's all good. That's all good. So, Watcher, any last comments from you?
Yeah, just appreciate all you guys. Thanks for being here. Make sure you share us out on social media. That also helps, as well as all the likes and stuff. And we appreciate each and every one of you for being here. And
we are, and I don't want to be accused of bait and switch. We are still working on the technology behind efficiently doing the call-in line. We had a little bit of a workaround, but in thinking about it, I think we want to streamline that a bit better so that it flows a bit easier.
Give you guys an actual number to call if we can do that. That'd be the best way.
An actual number, and I think we're efforting that as we speak, because I think that would be fun. Now that doesn't mean we're going to turn into the love line or anything of that nature. Less will be more, and Watcher gets to be the screen caller of.
Once I'm not gonna lie, boss. Once you get it set up, you're gonna make me tempted, and I'm gonna have to open the Coast to Coast AM spiritual successor.
That'll be a different show. So, yeah, you can indulge your insomnia, and talk about aliens or whatever goes on at 2:00 in the morning. But I won't be there for that. I can tell you that. So, thank you all. We'll be back next week, and I'm going to post the putative schedule of topics. As you know, we try to look around corners. But there was a lot of news today, and I wanted to sort of catch that up a little bit with everybody. But I'll post topics, and you're welcome as a group, since you have to suffer through this. You're welcome to suggest topics. You can DM me or Watcher or anybody on the council with a topic, and we're open and interested to that. We're interested in what you're interested in, within reason, and we'll go from there.
Are we gonna start to get some only stands rants? Is that
well,
is that
I
in
think
cards?
that's on that's on the CFC side of the equation. But we try to be a bit more urbane.
Oh no, they're looking for a service where they can pay and then you give them rant.
Oh yes, I'd be happy to do that. I'd be happy to do that. I'm going to keep my clothes on though, but and I'm happy to rant.
Earlier I said that the CFC is beer and chips, and this show is more bourbon and hors d'oeuvres. I mean,
Well, thank you. That's a very kind statement. That means we're on the right path.
yeah, absolutely.
And we'll go from there. Have a great evening, y'all. We'll see you next week. And Joe, drive safely down there to
I will.
whatever that forward operating base is that you're headed to. And I do expect pictures of you in the ghillie suit at some point. Okay.
And don't
Well,
stop.
there
and
will
take
be,
our
and we'll also
beer.
do some photos on the lucky the Commando 13 patches too.
Yeah, they should be.
Yeah.
They should be there tomorrow in the PO box that was provided, and
All right.
so we'll go from there.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
as Scott would say, everyone, stay safe.